One of Sega's lesser-known projects, particularly to those in the West, has been their chain of amusement parks known as Joypolis. Sega was, and is still, the largest producer of arcade games. And besides actually owning a series of arcade chains like Club Sega, the Sega Akihabara buildings, Sega Shinjuku Kabukicho, and their various other arcades, Joypolis sort of serves as a way for Sega to make these experimental arcade games and attractions, along with interactive adventure games and actual roller coasters. The first Joypolis, Yokohama Joypolis, featured Virtua Formula, a larger and modified version of Virtua Racing that used Formula 1 cockpits as the main controls, which would even move when you made turns and such. Also in Yokohama Joypolis was a roller coaster called Rail Chase the Ride, based on the arcade game Rail Chase, where you had to shoot at targets as you went through the coaster. Although the flagship Joypolis, Tokyo Joypolis, was where many different attractions were showcased. Similarly to Virtua Formula, there was an initial D Arcade Stage 4 attraction that actually used the real cars from the manga as the main controls that would simulate drifts and turns. Like, they legit have an RX-7 with an Ariyamamiya kit, which is extremely cool. Currently, they also have a Sonic racing game called Sonic Athletics that is powered by a treadmill. They have an interactive adventure game based on the Ace Attorney universe called Ace Attorney in Joypolis, where you had to solve a series of murders in Tokyo Joypolis. Halfpipe Tokyo is a snowboard rhythm game attraction where two people move along a halfpipe set to music and have to spin and rotate at the right timing to get a better score. Similarly to that, Gekion Live Coaster is both a rhythm game and a roller coaster combined, where the rhythm game actually controls the speed of the roller coaster. And this is only a slight dive into the deep history of Sega's Joypolis parks, as many locations would open and close over the years, as many different and diverse attractions would come and go. Not to mention that there would also be two additional Joypolises that opened in China, as well as similar branches of Joypolis called Sega World in the UK and GameWorks in the United States, with some international locations. Sega World and GameWorks were more traditional arcades that would promote many of Sega's new arcade games, but both the China Joypolis attractions, Sega World, and GameWorks would still receive many of the attractions the mainline Joypolises would get over the years. It is kind of surreal to see these large experimental and creative ways of interacting with some of these arcade games, and to see that also extend to the attractions and roller coasters themselves is also kind of surreal to see as well. Especially considering that many of these attractions are attached to Sega's own IPs and the various IPs of other studios. It is quite amazing to think I can play Initial D Arcade Stage 4 while driving and interacting with it in an RX-7. Sega has clearly put a lot of love into these massively creative games and attractions. Now, I don't know when exactly they started to work on this, but seeing how The House of the Dead is still one of Sega's most well-known IPs, it certainly is no surprise that they would eventually create an attraction for it, and one that would be based on The House of the Dead 4, simply known as The House of the Dead 4 Special, and it would be released almost a year after the fourth game in 2006. The House of the Dead 4 Special certainly is pretty weird and mysterious, partially because there just isn't much information about its development. Like, while I imagine Sega AM1 worked on it, considering that it runs on the same hardware and engine that the House of the Dead 4 uses, it's also something I can't really say for sure, as it could have easily been passed on to another team to work on. I don't know if Takashi Oda or the various other members of Sega AM1 even worked on it as well. But again, it wouldn't be that surprising if they weren't at the very least consulted on its development, and I imagine that Takashi Oda probably wrote the story for it as well. But one of the main reasons why House of Dead 4 Special is mysterious is mainly due to how there are very few physical versions of it that exist. I mean, the fucking Wikipedia page about it treats the physical version like it's a fucking cryptid. This game has been spotted in Europe, Japan, Brazil, Dubai, the Macau Fisherman's Wharf, and in the Hong Kong Mega Box. Ooh. For real though, the Wikipedia page also mentions that in America, there are no physical versions of it that are public. One of them had to be taken out due to continuous breakdowns and repairs, while another one was sold to a private collector. So the fate of both these machines are unknown. So it is very much possible that a physical version of the House of Dead 4 Special no longer exists, and is in fact dead. Fortunately though, not only do we know a lot about how the physical version actually played, but the PS3 version of the House of Dead 4 also includes House of Dead 4 Special. Despite some of the unique features of the physical version not being there in the PS3 version, it still is incredibly cool to be able to experience the game in a manner that can be widely accessible and is quite similar to the fantastic gameplay of House of Dead 4. But this is where this game gets more and more strange, as there are many aspects about the House of Dead 4 special that differs quite significantly from the House of Dead 4. I did actually consider including this game in the House of Dead 4 video, as there are a lot of similarities that both of these games share, but not only is the story widely different, but even just the tone has dramatically changed from the game it is expanding upon. The House of Dead 4 special sort of fits in this weird limbo state. Like, it's not really that different at its core. It does feel like an expansion of House of Dead 4, but it also feels really different from the game it is based on. I did sort of debate just not talking about it altogether because it really isn't that influential to the series, but for being a small side project, I feel that its history, the unique things it expands upon, and just simply it being an expansion of the House of Dead 4 makes it a neat inclusion in the House of Dead series. So, there are many features about the physical attraction that makes the House of Dead 4 special differ from a traditional light gun shooter. For one, the attraction mainly utilized a large room with a vehicle that would spin and move the players in front of two screens, one in the front and one in the back. Basically, there would be scenarios where the characters have to look behind themselves, and so the attraction would spin the players around to the screen behind them to shoot at additional zombies. Furthermore, the vehicle will move slightly whenever you make any sort of turn, further adding more weight to the character's movements. It's a mechanic that is actually quite similar to one of the original design concepts from the OG House of the Dead, the reflection system, where you'd also have one screen in the front and one screen in the back, and you'd have to constantly look behind yourself to see if there were any enemies there. Now, I don't know if that was exactly the inspiration behind this mechanic that you see in House of Dead 4 Special, especially since it is slightly different in that you no longer control when you turn around, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if this was meant to be an extension of that older idea. Obviously, I haven't played the attraction, but I can certainly imagine that this mechanic gives a lot of weight and feeling to the experience of the game. Like, just from watching certain footage of it, it is really cool seeing how the vehicle moves you around and capturing the feeling of the character's movements. And especially considering that the attraction uses surround sound and the light guns themselves actually have recoil to them, it certainly gives the game very strong immersion to it. Another main feature that this game had was a partner ranking, where it would show you how compatible you are with your partner based on how well the both of you performed during the game. I don't know why this is a feature to begin with, if I'm quite honest. Like, are couples walking into this game to decide the fate of their relationship and one of them is saying, "Honey, if we don't get a 75% partner ranking in a zombie light gun game, we can no longer be together." Obviously, I'm being facetious, but admittedly, it is a cute mechanic. I am just curious as to why they dropped the ranking system altogether. It's still kinda neat regardless though. I don't exactly know if it functions the same as the ranking system does in the House of Dead 4, but seeing as how you can still see the letters on the side, I'm going to say most likely. Other than that though, some of the other changes from the original are notably a lot smaller than the main gameplay mechanics. One of these is how lives are now replaced by a single large life bar that both of the players share. I can also imagine this mechanic being incredibly stressful for you as a player, as you not only have to worry about yourself, but also the partner you are with as well. And since there are also no continues once the life bar depletes, you probably really had to be as accurate as you can, considering you only have one life. There is also an escape button that is on the control panel of the machine, where you'd have to repeatedly hit the button to escape from zombies and bosses. It's basically what the shaky mechanic in the House of Dead 4 did whenever a zombie or boss grappled onto you. Although, it only makes me wonder why they just didn't use the shaky mechanic in the first place. I do imagine there were probably some logistics to it, but the shaky mechanic did make the shooting more grounded by you having to throw enemies off. Still, I do think the escape button mechanic would still be as tense regardless. But besides these mechanics, the House Dead 4 special pretty much plays the same as the House Dead 4. This can be especially seen in the PS3 version, as they pretty much dropped all of these mechanics in favor of the ones you see in House Dead 4. So in the PS3 version, lives and extra lives are back, the shaking mechanic is used to escape from zombies, and the raking system is how your performance is shown. And of course, there isn't any mechanic where you turn around to another screen. So I certainly imagine that there is a drastic change in feeling from the attraction and the console version. But the core gameplay still remains the same in both. It's pretty much the House Dead 4, but with a couple of extra chapters. The shooting still feels fantastic and fun. It's still incredibly methodical the way you have to control your aiming. The zombies are numerous and are as resilient, and the difficulty is really well balanced. It's still the same fun but intense gameplay that made the House Dead 4 so enjoyable and amusing. The only main difference in the gameplay between House Dead 4 and House Dead 4 Special that I can think of are these little events where you have to shoot at an approaching attack in a specific time limit. I'm quite bad at these. I don't exactly know why I am. Like, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but while I like to think I'm pretty good at House Dead 4, I seem to just suck at these parts, rather than on my horn. It certainly does add a lot to the tension of the already tense gameplay. Like, I remember getting really stressed as I desperately tried to prevent getting hit by the approaching truck. It is quite effective at creating these intense moments. Still though, the gameplay is really fantastic just due to the core gameplay being the House Dead 4's gameplay. And despite not being able to play the physical attraction, I do feel the main feature of the vehicle spinning and turning adds much weight and feeling to the gameplay, and it would certainly make the House Dead 4 Special such a unique experience. Even the other gameplay mechanics are quite neat to me, and while I do prefer the lives over the health bar, the shaking mechanic over hitting the escape button, and the raking system over the partner raking system, that I would appreciate more how these mechanics accompany the House Dead 4 Special's gameplay in a fantastic way. Despite the game only having 2 chapters, I find the locations that you go throughout the game to be really interesting and creative, as it still carries that gothic dilapidation aesthetic that was so present and vivid in the House Dead 4. However, this aesthetic is recontextualized through the different environments. One of my favorite chapters in the House Dead 4 was Chapter 5, where James and Kate were now on the streets of Venice and they had to drive around a now decrepit city, as cars have crashed into each other and debris and cracks seemingly cover the city. What really made this area cool as well was how it uniquely blended a gothic aesthetic with the modern city of Venice. The sunset orange illuminating the entire city, along with the sky mixing the colors of red, black, and orange, as the vivid shadows coat the places you are driving through. Chapter 5 defo had a strong vibe to it, and so it's cool that you get to see more of the surface of Venice in this chapter in particular. It is slightly reimagined though, as you play this first chapter during the middle of the day, which at first I thought kind of took away from the gothic vibe a bit, since there isn't really that sunset orange anymore. But they really implemented the lighting in a really cool way here. You'll see a lot of blue skies and golden sunshine as you walk and drive around Venice, but because of how vivid it is, especially with the way it reflects off objects or can stand out when you are in shadows, it can really create a warm and cozy feeling seeing all of this. The shadows themselves still carry the same vibe they do in the previous game, as they seem to varnish these areas in jet black, creating very ominous premonitions when exploring these places. Although it certainly is a lot less creepy visually speaking, as many of the outdoor areas you walk around don't really have the same vibrant colors that the House Dead 4 did. Weirdly though, whenever you are walking through a corridor or a room like this, the game does look incredibly gothic, as sunset orange lighting appears once again, and the usage of a lot of radiant colors like dark reds and bluish grays really create a mysterious vibe in places like these. There is also a slight mystical fog that does add a neat eeriness to rooms like this. It is a bit inconsistent from the outdoor areas in that regard, but the game still looks amazing though. For me especially, it was really great to be able to explore more of Venice and to get more of a feeling of what it's like, even just for a little bit. Seeing the decrepit cars that are wrecked and falling apart as hordes of zombies seem to walk around everywhere, or exploring these dilapidated buildings that are worn out from neglect and decay. Not to mention that, once again, the giant cracks and rubble that are thrown around in disarray are also very prevalent like in the original game. The dilapidation is just as much of a feature here as it was in Chapter 5. It's a small detail that really adds much to the overall vibe of this chapter. Surprisingly though, I really vibed a lot with the last chapter, which takes place in this futuristic research facility. It's easily the most colorful and vibrant looking area in both the House of Dead 4 and the House of Dead 4 Special. It gives off a lot of similar vibes when playing the original The House of the Dead, with exploring the futuristic research facilities in that, as you are just sort of overwhelmed by all this futuristic technology and the otherworldly look to the place. Almost every room you go to feels like it really pops out at you because of how colorful it is. Seeing the bright yellow pipes and railings along with the dark blue transparent tubes like you see in this room, or these hallways that glow a vibrant purple hue and a mystifying green as you see these holographic diagrams, or this room particularly with it being coated in a crimson blood red, as the crimson red is so intense that even the zombies seem to be cloaked in that color. Again, this entire chapter feels otherworldly, as it is kind of surreal seeing these kinds of rooms that you've never really seen before. It's incredibly similar to what Chapter 3 of The House of Dead 1 did, as you feel like you are in this strange area that you shouldn't be in. I'd say it is mostly eerie because of all this advanced technology that you are seeing. Like, going through these rooms and seeing the various wiring, the dark blue transparent tubes, and the holographic organs and coding does give you this sense that what you are seeing is very mysterious and larger than life. I mean, especially with this room in particular, I honestly have no idea what is going on and what any of these things do. It also doesn't help that the zombies are swimming and wandering around in this mysterious liquid as well. But I don't think these areas would be as bizarre if it weren't for the vivid colors. Again, this room being coated in crimson blood red really does make this entire area super creepy. It is undeniably pretty though. Despite being very eerie, the usage of these very colorful hues of blues, yellows, reds, greens, and purples are just really pleasant to look at. It's hard not to appreciate how great this chapter and this game looks. I just find myself sort of mystified at the diverse color palette, and it makes for a visually striking game. It'd be good. The atmosphere of the House of Dead 4 Special is quite similar in the House of Dead 4, but it is really cool how these additional environments slightly expand upon the features of the previous games. I love how I was able to explore Venice more and experience the very decrepit but gothic city again, as the vivid lighting, shadows, and colors give off the perturbed and unsettling feelings associated with Chapter 5 of House of Dead 4. I love how I was able to explore this futuristic research facility, similar to the one in the original The House of Dead, only significantly more vibrant in color and the futuristic technology it features, as these pretty colors and detailed technology create a very mystical and otherworldly vibe to the entire facility. Its atmosphere is really amazing and fantastic once again. While both the atmosphere and the gameplay are still very consistent with the House of Dead 4, and are still incredibly great for these reasons, I do feel where this game contradicts heavily from the House of Dead 4, and what is by far the weakest element of this entire game, has to do largely with the story and the tone that this game has. It's probably my biggest criticism with this game, unfortunately. The story is okay for the most part. It takes place directly after the events of the House of Dead 4, and involves Kate meeting up with G from the previous games to try and stop the outbreak finally. G says that they have to take them down to the source, and so they both wander through Venice and this research facility to try and reach the source, battling their way through the hordes of zombies once again. The story is really short obviously, and there's not a lot to it other than what I described, but it definitely serves the purpose of a side story. Although, it is strange how they decided to go about this. Like, not that I'm one of those kinds of people who deeply cares about the integrity of the lore in regards to the House of Dead series. I mean, the stories in most of these games are just excuses for you to shoot shit, but it is really weird to have the Halstead 4 end off on a good note, with Kate walking away all determined like, only for this threat that James sacrificed himself for to continue to persist. I mean, you could say this addresses a possible criticism with previous House of the Dead games, and how they just kinda ended after you beat the game, as if all of a sudden all the zombies just magically disappear after you kill the big bad. But I don't really care that it always ends like that, if I'm quite honest, because it felt pretty clear that it was the end of the conflict anyway, and if there were any zombies wandering around, they were either taken care of or just aren't a threat anymore. So it is a bit strange to me that the story is basically just the same plot as 4, only shorter and not contextualized as well. But it really also isn't that big of a deal to me, as it is supposed to be a small little side story for this experimental arcade attraction. Besides, the story is still really fun, as there will be plenty of humorous and entertaining moments, especially when it turns out that the magician is actually alive. Uh-oh, stinky. I do quite love the build up to it, as he just kinda suddenly shows himself out of nowhere. It does give me similar vibes to what the magician did in the House of Dead 2. And as a side note, his boss fight is incredibly fun, as it has been in the past. The only notable difference is that his movements and attacks are really fast, making the fight one of the most intense boss fights of the series in my opinion. What is a bigger deal to me though is the tone of this game, as the voice acting, writing, and just even the overall vibe feels really lackluster. What I loved about the House of Dead 4 story was just how it was able to portray the events of the story in a serious and genuine way through the very great voice acting and writing. It was still silly in certain parts, but it was written well enough to know when to be serious and when to be humorous. But the House of Dead 4 Special's writing and voice acting is just really bad. Like, not only are the voices of Kate and G not really that invested into the story and are just really boring, but the writing here as well just doesn't feel at all natural or authentic. It's written in a way like it's constantly trying to summarize everything as quickly as possible, or describe any emotion that a character is feeling.
I know, G. I promise I'd continue to fight, as long as there was still hope.
No telling what's waiting for us ahead. We better get a move on. Huh?
Oh no! We're gonna get caught!
The writing seems to always be written very directly and matter-of-factly, and it doesn't allow you to sort of feel any of the emotions a character might possibly feel, because it's basically explained for you. Although, like with the House of Dead 2, I feel some of the lines would have been okay if the voices portrayed these lines in a very grounded way. Take this line that Kate says here, for instance.
This is giving me the creeps.
If this was the House of Dead 4, the voice actor for Kate would have probably said that line in a way that would make Kate sound like she would be shuddering or disgusted by what she is looking at, like she does in this line from 4.
Just looking at her makes me sick.
But the voice acting of the House of Dead 4 special turned what could have been a very decently conveyed line into a line that just feels awkward, as the voice actor for Kate just sounds annoyed in this line. With that being said though, if this was any other House of Dead game and there was no connection to the House of Dead 4, the bad voice acting and writing would certainly be more welcomed. Hell, it would have been a fucking feature of the game. However, the voice acting and writing isn't even really the good kind of bad voice acting and writing. I gotta be honest, I didn't really find any of these lines funny. To me, what made the House of Dead 2's voice acting so funny was how the voice actors really exaggerated their lines a lot. Like sure, the silly voices of the characters themselves were detached from the very catastrophic situation they found themselves, but at least they went all out on their performance, you know? It just feels like in this game, the voice actors didn't really care as much. None of these performances feels exaggerated or overly silly. Like, even the funny action hero one-liners that this series has are just so underwhelming in this game.
And good riddance. I'll put you out of your misery.
These kinds of lines are usually said with some kind of enthusiasm and excitement to it, but there isn't really any of that in the one-liners G says. It just sounds really bland. Ironically, the best voice acting in this game comes from the magician, as the dude sounds legit intimidating because of how deep and electronic his voice is.
I have been waiting for this moment for some time. Now you shall have a taste of the pain that I have endured.
It's quite good. All things considered, I'm still okay with how the tone and the story turned out. I am a bit disappointed, but I also understand that this game is supposed to be a small little side story, so I'm not too terribly worried over this or anything. I just do wish that the tone of the story was more consistent with The House of Dead 4, or at the very least try to get the sillier tone of the previous games. But it doesn't do either, unfortunately. It can come across as quite boring at times. It's easily one of my biggest criticisms with any of the House of Dead games. The House of the Dead 4 special isn't really that remarkable in the whole context of the House of the Dead series. The really fantastic and innovative things it does for the series, like the gameplay and the atmosphere, are already things that the House of Dead 4 did. But still, using that near-perfect formula that the House of Dead 4 has, arguably makes the game just as fantastic to play through as House of Dead 4. So, I still found myself enjoying the amazing and satisfying gunplay and being creeped out at the gothic and dilapidated city of Venice. However, despite being an expansion of the House of Dead 4, the game does very little to capture the tone of that game, other than taking place immediately after the events of it. It has none of the good inflection and articulation that the previous game's voice actors had that really helped you understand how apprehensive the situation was, nor the well-crafted writing that made these characters' reactions feel more genuine and natural. These voices just sound incredibly disinterested and boring, while the writing is so direct and tries to explain everything. And even if this was another House of Dead game, this voice acting and writing isn't even the funny kind of bad voice acting and writing, as many of these lines lack any sort of enthusiasm, even when they are trying to say funny action hero one-liners. It is disappointing in that sense. Nevertheless, it's not something I'm too worried about, and I still think the game is good regardless. I mean, I think it's important to contextualize that while it is an expansion to the House of Dead 4, it's not really a mainline game, nor was it trying to be. It's a small side story that isn't really that integral to the entire story of the House of Dead series. It's a small little game meant for an amusement park attraction, and it does a great job at fulfilling that purpose. It's still amazingly fun and enjoyable to play through, and there are still many things you can appreciate about it, like with the atmosphere and the gameplay. In fact, I think that's what I find really engrossing and distinctive about this game, how it's an arcade attraction and how it's connected to Sega's Joypolis parks. What this game kind of represents is this unique project for Sega that is still continuing to this day. Not only have they invested a lot of time into these very experimental arcade attractions, rides, and roller coasters, but they are even planning on releasing the House of Dead Scarlet Dawn attraction that is supposed to come out soon. To me, I think that's what makes this game incredibly cool. As much as the House of Dead 4 special probably is one of my least favorite games to come out of the series, I still had a lot of fun with it, and I would love to try the physical version of the game if it is ever possible. I can imagine enjoying myself way more with this game if that were the case. However, while it's certainly unlikely that I would ever play a physical version of it, I think it's still fantastic that there is a way to experience this game through a console release. It is honestly one of the more distinguishing releases of the whole series.